I was, as I say, I was raised in West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia, and had always sort of, I don't know, I was always dreaming, about various things and what I could do. I think eventually, first, because I wanted to be a rock and roll star or whatever. Man, I was always dreaming those kinds of things. I go to movies by myself. I remember going to see Gone with the Wind by myself. Uh, but I met a man when I was a freshman or sophomore in college, and he said, "Why don't you take an acting class?" And he was my advisor. And I was in trouble academically anyway at that time, and I thought, well, I don't know. And he said, "Can I get a good grade or something?" He says, "Well, you look like you could." Anyway, I took the class and never looked back. I enjoyed it so much. Then I started being in the university. I started participating in the university plays that they had. I believe the first thing I did was a musical, Brigadoon, and now will you come to Sandy's booth? Come over to Sandy's booth. Da 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 dee 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 da da dee. It's a delightful musical, actually. And then I did Oklahoma. Played Will Parker. It was a musical. Everything's up to date in Kansas City. They're going about as far as they can go. They went and built a skyscraper 7 stories high, about as high as a building ought to grow, and then all of that. And then I started doing, I did a comedy role, Mr. Roberts, Ensign Pulver, and I loved it. And that was, I don't know, the turning, and I said, no, I know this is what I want to do. But I was in West Virginia and didn't know how to get out, and so I went to school in Illinois for a bit because they'd offered me an assistantship, and then I could act out there. And then eventually a man, making a short story long, but recommended me for an audition up in Chicago. And then I went to the Barter Theater in Virginia, and then I went to the Cleveland Playhouse, and eventually I went to New York. And I was doing some off Broadway things. Had just finished a thing with the late Hermione Gingold, I believe. So had done a few things, and then got the call to come on to Dark Shadows. Basically, though, all of my training up to that time had been in theater, on the stage. I had done very little. I believe even I did Flatboat Man, but I did that even while I was doing Dark Shadows. So Dark Shadows was the first, television or anything like that I had done. We got to the studio, which was again on West 53rd Street, at 8 o'clock in the morning. There was always a display, not a display. There was always a whole collection of donuts and that sort of thing. And I had my favorite, and I always remember this because it was a roll and had nuts on top of it. So I was always trying to, get to it before anyone else did, or at least cut it in half and hide half of it, so that I would have it there after we finished we would read it after we do our block through. So 8 o'clock in the morning, we get to the studio, do all of that, whatever, sit down. I think we read the script. Now, what we did the night before, we would have a read-through after the taping session of when we did the show. Then we get undressed, sometimes not even get undressed, and then we go into the rehearsal hall, and we would read through the next day's script. Then you go home at night, learn your lines, come in to the studio at 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe read it again, and then we stand it up on its feet, and we would block through with Leila or Henry or whoever was directing at that time. Generally, it was those two stalwarts. And we would block it for, there for camera, but just block it out up there in the rehearsal hall. Then we would take a break, and I don't recall whether we went down on the floor and blocked it for camera down there, or sometimes the cameraman came up in the rehearsal hall to watch, but then we would go downstairs and block through it. Now, some of us would have your makeup calls were staggered, you know what I mean? So who was not in this scene, so they're in makeup or whatever. But eventually we would block it for camera. We would all get made up. We'd all have our costumes on. And then we would go down. And sometimes we'd do a run-through without our costumes, you know. Then we'd do a run-through of the show. And I think generally we only did one run-through. And by that time, you know, we had to, it'd probably be close to 3 o'clock or whatever, and we had to make final adjustments costume-wise, and then we went down and taped the show, which was always an adventure in itself. Now that's sort of in a brief, you know, recollection what it was. It was very much live theater because we did it, as we say, on tape, but it was what we call quote-unquote live on tape, because we did not correct mistakes. We did not go back. The only way we stopped is if the teleprompter broke down, and then Jonathan might grind to a halt or something like that. But I could never use a teleprompter. I don't know why. I didn't like to use it too much. I worked it an entirely different way. I don't know that Joan couldn't use it because I don't think she could see it. I don't know. But we stood the chance of, as I recall at that time, if we didn't finish it on time, we'd lose the cameras we'd lose the tape apparatus to the news department, as I recall during that time. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I think there was something about that. We had to finish within a certain time. If we didn't, we lost the cameras, and we couldn't start up again till like 6 o'clock. Because they were taping whatever, the news for the West Coast or whatever. So, but seeing as how we did, now maybe Dan and the Powers that Be decided to do this on purpose. But all the mistakes were kept in. I mean, it was a mad dash. I mean, you would do the run-through or whatever, and then we had like 3, 4, 5 areas of the studio. It wasn't a big studio, but it was big enough so that when you finished a particular scene here with this camera, and before the next scene started, you had to run dash, and sometimes you'd say, oh my God, where am I? What do I do? Where do I go? What scene? Oh yes, I'm this. So it had that kind of energy about it that was sort of half out of that's what it's supposed to be and half out of fear. Bloody fear of what do I say next? Where am I going? All of this. And then sometimes you'd have Carlin under the camera, you know, making faces at you like that and all of those kinds of things. But we never went back and to correct anything like that unless the teleprompter broke. And that's all and the studio caught on fire one night. But we did not stop. I mean, we didn't stop. So it had that kind of feel to it. And you would be pumped. You would be nervous. Too nervous. You know, I was, you know, at times I was just, it was quite terrific. It was quite nice too, in a way. It played into it. We were so right. And thank goodness, I don't know, the audience didn't know that, oh my God, look at them. They've got such terror on their face. And the terror actually came from, well, what do I say next or where do I go? Rather than the actual terror of the character in the situation. But yes, it all worked. You could use it, as they say. Use it.